every fucking additive that is used is toxic. If we take the most basic kind of cliches, such as we are what we eat, are we in the end just being raised ourselves like pigs in a fucking slaughterhouse to consume whatever bullshit people throw at us?
It seems kind of crazy that we've accepted that our food's going to just destroy us, kill us, poison us. It's filled with all these chemicals, and it seems like there's nothing we can do about it. But I got a chance to meet an absolute legend out there, Tom Lubbe of Matassa Wines. He's out there in southern France with his biodynamic farming techniques, making wines, bringing back the soil, which is so important because
healthy soil leads to healthy plants, which leads to healthy people.
I had the great privilege of having this conversation with Tom, who lays out the foundation for a future. It's based on actually going back a little bit into the past so that we can chart a path forward and actually give ourselves some more power in this space that we felt so powerless in. Well, Tom.
Andres.
Why are we here?
Well, I'm here because it's my house. Cut straight to a deeper version of that. I mean, I'm here in a sense because nature abhors a vacuum. If I was to have tried to do a project like I've done in this part of southern France, in New Zealand or South Africa, places where I've grown up and lived at various times in my life, it would have been financially very difficult. And from a very simple point of view, this part of France, like many parts of Europe, is extremely cheap, and it was possible to do something without massive financial input in terms of growing and making wine. And as much as I love winemaking, having the freedom to make the kind of wine I want to make, which is to say from organic grapes and without additive, and to grow those grapes yourself is considerably easier to do when you have control over the land. And beyond that, I met my wife who's from here, and that was why I stayed.
Yeah, because I think my guess is coming to a traditional winemaking region like we're in, Roussillon.
Yeah, we're in the Pyrenees Oriental, the Roussillon.
I would guess coming to a traditional winemaking region in southern France, of all places, being an outsider, whatever that means, would have its difficulties, despite maybe having ownership of your land being a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you went on the regenerative organic path of farming pretty much anywhere in the last 20 years, you would be considered a bit of an outsider. I don't think I would be. I mean, obviously the language, certain cultural elements mean that I'm always going to be a foreigner here. My French will always be accented, to say the best. For this region, I think the fact that, yes, it's traditionally a grape growing area, and it has been for nearly 3,000 years, as far as I can work out, or Wikipedia can work out. That's changing, and it's changing rapidly and extremely quickly, to the point where, if I'd come here at the beginning of the 90s, I couldn't have done what I've done because the vineyards wouldn't have been for sale. And what it's done is attract a lot of young winemakers, want to be winemakers. As I say, nature abhors a vacuum, and it'll fill it with any kind of flotsam and jetsam that comes along. And
well, let's talk about your way of making wine, because I think it's quite unique, and it's the reason why we're here, probably.
Yeah, again, and maybe my specific iteration, obviously everyone's is unique, but it's a very simple premise, is you just use grapes, and there's no additives. So there's, the additive everyone mentions is sulfur dioxide, SO2, which is not the same as mineral sulfur, as I've pointed out many times before. And it's highly toxic. But there's also, I think, about 120 other additives legal in organic wine in the European Union, and definitely as much in other parts of the winemaking world. And it's a desire to step away from industrial process, food processing that makes up so much of what people are expected to eat and drink today. Um, so just allowing grapes to ferment, healthy grapes. So that's a long story in its own right, in terms of how we get there, how we farm, because obviously the farming is at the basis of all this.
I think I'd like an explanation of why organic farming, and specifically within the wine world, why does it matter?
Okay, I'm not going to take that as a provocation. No, yeah, I think, and it's quite sad because I think a lot of people still have this perception that it's a luxury thing instead of being something essential, and it's essential, I think, on a personal human level of the individual in terms of health. And it's essential in terms of the overall health and well-being of the planet and of the environment that we've allowed over the last century. The agrochemical industry, industrial, in all its manifestations, from the production of chemical fertilizer through to sprays, pesticides, herbicides such as Roundup, and through to the supermarket end, which is the pointy end of that industry, pushing people to buy crap that looks like food and pretends to be food but isn't food. This is something certainly people have been conscious of for the last century. Someone like Rudolf Steiner wrote about our declining diet, poor nutrition already in the 1920s. Doctors, where and when they're allowed to, have expressed alarm rates of illness relating to the way things are farmed and the quality of the produce are rising. People have never had so much calories and such poor nutrition. First world diseases, which is diabetes, heart disease, cancer. Essentially, coming from a diet that's top heavy in calories and very poor in mineral nourishment. So why is it important? I mean, it's why is it? How can it not be?
Correct.
If we take the most basic kind of cliches, such as "we are what we eat," what are we if we're coming out of a chemically driven, robotically enabled agricultural system? Are we in the end just being raised ourselves like pigs in a fucking slaughterhouse to consume whatever bullshit people throw at us? Or do we take an active role in helping fix the earth, at least the little corner of it that we're on, especially as a farmer, as someone producing a product that people consume? In my case, it's wine, occasionally a small amount of olive oil.
A very good, great wine. In fact, when I reached out about your wine, Matassa, and you kindly agreed to meet with me. And as I've gotten to know you a little bit in the last day, it's become apparent that the process that has been laid before you in order to create organic wine is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I often say that. I mean, anyone that wants to get into farming generally is an idiot. But it's certainly with our particular experience of climate change in this area in the last even 5 years, certainly over the last 20 years, we've lost half our rainfall. So things that we took for granted are no longer. We've shifted from 600 millimeters a year to 300. Under 300 is technically desert, and in the last 4 years we've got an average of about 240 millimeters. So it's a very short framework in which to place an average, but still, it's been a pretty scary few years. But at the same time, the fact that we've come through these 4 years, we've had more rain in the last month than we've had in the previous year. that still you believe in a future, and you also work to make that future possible. We continue to do the basics each year, which is for us composting cover crops, sowing a multitude of different plants between the vines, but doing as much as we can within the parameters that we've set to allow our wines to produce very little grapes, but still enough to get by. Healthy soil leads to healthy plants, which leads to healthy people, and that remains a very basic. I think the most useful thing ever to come out of Steiner's writing and research, but
So
it,
Steiner wrote the book on
well, he didn't
biodynamics.
write a book. He gave a series of lectures that were written down by people around him. I think it was like a weekend or something. It was he wrote and talked about a lot of stuff, and most of it not that interesting to me. But I think, as I said, there's definitely other commentators as well who went into far more detail. I think Sir Albert Howard wrote 5 books on compost, which all say the same thing, more or less. When we start talking about things like permaculture, regenerative farming, these are far more interesting manifestations of what are loosely termed biodynamics or organics. And organics is a pretty vast field of all good agriculture should be organic. Unfortunately, we still live in a situation and time when agricultural chemicals are legal and used and abused.
And on top of that, they make it difficult for you to make your process of organic farming easier.
Yeah. I think if we briefly mentioned the word sulfur earlier, and I've touched on the fact that volcanic sulfur is a mineral. Again, I reiterate that the sulfur used in wine is not a mineral. It's a synthetic molecule, and sulfur dioxide is highly toxic. Okay, we don't recommend you eat mineral sulfur, but you can spread it on the ground, and it's actually a fertilizer. Many soils lack it. There's no relationship between the mineral and the wine additive or food additive, because it's not just used in wine. So yeah, we would prefer to use volcanic sulfur on our vineyards, but we are increasingly pressed into buying the more expensive, less effective byproduct of the petroleum industry, petrochemical industry, which is sulfur in a mineral form, but as a byproduct of petroleum refining. So it's I don't see that as being sympathetic or encouraging to a more natural way. It's a way to push people into supporting the same big companies. I think people generally are encouraged to react against that it's not necessary, that we need the chemical industry to feed the world. That if we don't allow the chemical industry the agrochemical industry to do what it wants, that there'll be this massive shortfalling of food. Don't think there's really any shortage of food in the world. Certainly not with a lot of the overproduction. What there is a shortage of money, and people can't afford to buy food. I don't think there's any intention on the part of the agrochemical industry to feed the world as such. That's naive and downright dishonest to say there is. Their intention is just to make profit at any expense, whether that expense is human health or whether that expense is the destruction of the planet. While the effects of global warming and climate change are maybe more visible in certain more extreme climates, they're touching on everyone everywhere, and this seems to me an act of such folly and insane stupidity.
You said something yesterday when we were doing a tasting. It was like there's only so much that you necessarily do with the wines. Like one of the wines you had didn't have even a tasting nozzle, and you're like, honestly, I don't really even try it until it's done, because you kind of let the product do its own thing. You let nature run its course. Yeah, I wonder how much of our need to kind of introduce ourselves in a process comes from, I don't know, a general fear that maybe we have of our own death or
our own nature,
nature.
which is mortal, finite, pathetic. Yeah, it's I definitely think. I mean, that's one cuvée El Caner, that we make in clay jars, and they do not have tasting valves, and I'm very happy about that. I think you have to pay $100 extra to get the tasting valves in the clay jars, and because I'm a cheap ass. But no, I also, as generally, I don't taste my own wines very often. I mean, I know the grapes are good. I see the process while we're harvesting and making the wine, and certainly by the time it goes into the clay jars after pressing, I mean, I'm pretty sure of what I've got. There's no reason it should go bad. There's a pretty limited range of disasters that can happen, and this, and I also think it's quite a seductive idea that that we control this process, and obviously we can, but yes, using all these additives, let's filter that and crossflow filter, sterilize this. What does it say in the end? That we don't actually trust our own produce, which is to say the grapes. We don't trust the wine we're making, that it's something that we need to hammer into shape and keep it away from its own sort of treacherous natural form, and to make it something that it can go through these channels of supermarkets and 3 Michelin star restaurants, which bizarrely seem to have exactly the same requirements for sterility and predictability and boringness and a lack of excitement. And I can already hear the pearl clutches and the cheap seats screaming about, volatile acidity or mousiness or whatever particular problem they identify with natural wine as being unpalatable. And that's okay, it's definitely natural wine's not for everyone, in the same way that proper cheese is not for everyone. Some people actually prefer the processed shit in a plastic little wrap, that they put on a burger in some shitty burger joint. It's not cheese. We're allowed, or they're allowed to call it cheese, but it's not fucking cheese. It's just some weird lactic byproduct of some other gross fucking process. And wine's the same. Most of what people drink on an airplane or from a supermarket, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, it's not really wine. It's not fermented grapes that have been put in a bottle. It's yes, some base grape material and an awful lot of other shit. And I know that if I drink a bottle of that, the next day I'm going to feel like shit. And no matter what of these elements that might cause people to get upset, whether it's volatile acidity or some kind of yeast flavors, yeast byproduct flavors that we can find in so many products like bread or kimchi or cheese or all kinds of fermented foods. I know these things don't actually harm me. When I drink something and I can feel this added tartric acid, which is highly refined. It's got nothing to do with the actual tartric acid you find in a grape in its natural form. The refined version is also extremely toxic. Packet yeast is toxic. Every fucking additive that is used is toxic. And you're somehow meant to feel that this is a kind of cultural / nutritional value. No, it doesn't. No more than that slice of pathetic orange plastic cheese that is not cheese. I'd rather eat some weird skanky fucking farm cheese because it's good.
Hell yeah.
And yes, you can taste that it came from milk. You can even, if the cheese is particularly good, you can get some of those crystals that remind you of sweet early summer grass that was full of sugars and got transformed into this magical product, and it's been aging for 3 years in a hut somewhere. And it's not that I'm constantly eating a shitload of great cheese. But if I do eat cheese, I want it to be proper cheese.
Yeah.
If I eat bread, I want it to be proper bread. I don't want to eat some weird fucking white pre-sliced bullshit that is nothing to do with bread, nothing. And wanting some real things in your life is I don't think like too demanding.
Don't you think it's crazy that it's almost like, I don't know how it happened, but wanting real things, like real things, has somehow been painted as being crazy?
Yeah, I mean it's I heard someone actually not that much older than me complaining about how young people are obsessed with wanting real this, real that, real coffee. Like somehow instant coffee's not good enough for them. And I'm like, well, good, because instant coffee's not good enough for them. Instant coffee's fucking disgusting. And I think we have flavor. We have this ability to appreciate good flavors and also to be warned, to be alerted by bad flavor. That must be part of our DNA, is the ability to say that tastes like shit, it's poison, stay away from it. This is, well, maybe you lose one or two of the tribe in the process, but it's this is part of who we are, being able to taste stuff and make judgments upon that. That we can trust our palates for us. I shy away from the kind of idea that paying 10,000 euros for a bottle of wine is some kind of qualitative step forward. It's not. In the same way that eating some disgusting 1,000 euro menu, and I need to tread a little carefully here, but in some rarefied restaurant is good nutrition. It's not. It's more or less bullshit that allows people to spend far too much money that they probably shouldn't fucking have because they didn't get taxed properly.
Also, I feel like this world of eating good food and whole food has also been associated with privilege, and not just obviously the privilege of being able to break from a system that's been manipulating. I think there's this idea that organics in a variety of worlds and whole foods are not accessible to people because they don't have enough money.
Obviously, I'm going to fall back on the idea that normal people don't earn enough money because they're working for Wankstains who don't pay them enough, and those Wankstains have too much money, and therefore they can spend it on 10,000 euro bottles of wine and 1,000 euro menus and all that crock of shit. I stay away from the fine wine market as such, with a certain pleasure, but I don't see that as a reason to accept chemical agriculture as the only alternative. Saying, well, there's a lot of people who can't eat organic produce. We get into this weird circular thing. But I mean, this idea that we've lowered the standard of living across the planet to the point where people can't afford proper food. In many cases, traditional food growing systems have been broken down. Food distribution systems have been broken down. In our case, we're surrounded by supermarkets, large supermarkets that have 270 types of yogurt, none of which is good. Small farmers markets struggle, and fortunately some of them still function in this part of France. But most people will prefer the ease, what they think is the ease and what they think is the convenience of driving 20 minutes to a massive supermarket and finding a parking place and spending 200 or 300 euros on a caddy full of crap. I mean, 200 euros goes pretty far in a farmer's market, but you definitely don't get a lot of the extra stuff, a lot of the plastic and bells and whistles, and you don't get 270 types of flavored yogurt. You get one or two, and people also see that as being a kind of poverty, I guess, and that's also a problem of education, a problem of perspective, a problem of brainwashing, a problem of the world we live in, which is dominated by scarier and scarier advertising, and where I guess a lot of it's no longer even advertising. It's now part of what we loosely term culture. That people believe they need all 270 types of pink, green, blue, mauve yogurt.
So, okay, there's a lot of things that are stacked against us here. So, how do you stay doing what you do despite all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the short, I don't feel that the difficulty is being the dominant aspect. I mean, the difficulties are just what go into make up your daily life. I mean, on one level, I don't know how to do anything else. I have to earn a living. I have a family to feed, and so on and so forth. I have a personal, for want of a better word, character. That means I often choose the difficult path. At times, it actually feels like the easy path. I think for the first 10 years, there was no real organized, coherent natural wine market. And for my first 10 years of Matterserts, from 2002 to 2012, national natural wine became quite fashionable. And, there's places like, well, there are no places like Noma, but Noma in Copenhagen, which was a big part of raising natural wine into a more general consciousness in Europe. Outside of, Paris, which had a pretty flourishing natural wine culture for already a decade. New York, strangely, which was strangely and wonderfully, has been a very vibrant place for natural wine as well since the turn of the century.
I keep coming back to this idea of doing less,
Yeah,
being way more.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was ever one motto to fill and to sit over natural winemaking, is less is more. If you can step back from the furious processes of extraction, this again, people getting in there and thrashing the shit out of their fermentation with pump overs and punch downs, and making that wine, it's virtually always too much. In my opinion, in my palate, and a wine that has been allowed just to macerate, to ferment, for the processes to happen without this sort of constant interruption, in the interests of making a bigger, heavier, richer, more grabby wine that's going to literally grab people's attention, throats and stomachs, and make them pay attention and make them happy to spend €1,000, whatever the fuck they pay. Yeah, to be able to be more gentle, to allow the thing just to sit in the tank and bubble away, because it is going to bubble away. They do bubble away. You don't need to be beating the living shit out of the wine all day, every day, or at all. You just need to get it in the grapes in a tank. You need to let it ferment. You need to take it out, press it, put it in some kind of container, and then get it into bottle. It's an extremely simple process. And if we believe the Georgians, and I almost invariably do, people have been doing it for over 7,000 years, and well enough that they kept doing it. Because if there's one thing about farmers, they're a relatively pragmatic part of the population. And if all wine was shit before we got into heavy processing after World War II, and I really don't believe it was, and certainly some of the older bottles I've drunk from the 19th and early 20th century definitely disprove it as well. People just wouldn't have kept doing it. And the fact that people were able to do it using clay amphora and bloody animal skins and glass jars and God knows what else, it's not that hard. And I think demystifying the actual winemaking part is a very important part of how I see helping educate other people to make wine or appreciate wine. And, before I want to hear about some winemakers' dubious genius, I'd rather see the state of their soil, and I'd rather see and ideally smell it, feel it underfoot, maybe dig it up a bit if it's not too rude, and see where that wine is actually coming from. But mostly you don't get to do that. And but I think I can kind of taste it in wines if people have managed not to block it. I think that there can be a lot of truth in a bottle if you're open to it. And in the same way, there can also be a lot of lies in a bottle. But, we all essentially do have different palates, but I'm championing a tiny part of the wine market, and financially a very unimportant part of the wine market. So there's many people who speak far better than I can and have a far more powerful infrastructure behind them, far more credibility, and so on and so forth. Say the direct opposite of everything I'm saying. But that's okay. I think this is also part of human culture. I've always looked for people who can provide a simple explanation, a simple indication. And I'm tended to be more suspicious of people who have complicated recipes, because I don't think things need to be that complicated. Simple work well done is usually enough. I think it's starting to rain.
It's
by
starting
the
to
way.
rain, so I think maybe...
Plus, I'm freezing my fucking bollocks off.
Let's do one more thing. I'm starting to do this thing where every episode we end with a question, but not from me. It's from you. And not to me or anyone in specific, but it's kind of like, what's a question that you wish more people would answer for themselves?
Oh, for themselves. What do I like? I often worry that people don't trust themselves to like things, that they don't trust their own sense of taste. I wish people were more secure in just enjoying what they enjoy and not having to look for ratification or backup on is it okay to like this? And I love it when people have a very spontaneous and an honest reaction to what I do. And I often worry about the reverse when people are afraid to express how they actually feel about something, anything. Actually, we can go way beyond food here.
Totally.
Though there's no need.
What do I like? Sweet. Thanks,
So, yeah.
Tom.
Great pleasure.
Pleasure.